and I obviously welcome the bill. I welcome the fact that the government is dealing with the issue comprehensively and expeditiously. I think that's a responsibility which rests not just with the Minister and Government, but actually rests with all of us in this House, because for far too long the Irish people have waited to have a say on this. What we're doing is giving them a platform to precisely decide that matter for themselves. And I think when we do that, we do have to put party and personal views behind ourselves and say, really, this is a personal, private healthcare matter. The idea that it ever had a place in a constitution is, to me, really frightening. And I respect the fact that many of our citizens have very different views on this subject, and they are entitled to those views and they're entitled to have those views respected. But the only way everybody's view can be respected is if we repeal the 8th Amendment and allow people who feel they need to choose abortion to have that right, because people who don't want to choose abortion for religious or other grounds have that right already respected, and I fully respect and stand over that. So I welcome the bill. I find it strange in some ways how much the debate has moved on since those days, 6 years ago now, when myself, Deputy Wallace and Deputy Collins moved the first medical treatment termination of pregnancy in the case of a risk to a life of pregnant woman bill. And at that time we were very apologetic that the only legislation we could put forward was provide for abortion in circumstances where a woman's life was in danger. But even that limited ground, the vote was 110 to 20 against. And not just the vote, but the content of the discussion has moved on so much in that time that it says a lot. But in some ways what it says is that everything is different, but legislatively everything has remained the same. So we need to have the 8th Amendment repealed so that we can recognise properly Ireland's abortion reality. I would say as well that I do welcome the judgment of the Supreme Court this week also. I think it is helpful. I think the fact that it has been clear in its ruling clears the way for us to recognise at last fully the rights of pregnant women who, as I say, should never have been put in that position in the Constitution in the first place. And in saying that, I think it's important to say that doesn't mean, as the argument has started already, that the unborn has no rights. That's not true. What it says is that the unborn has no constitutional rights other than that outlined in the 8th Amendment. But how do all our peers across Europe and what we would call our compatriots in the advanced world treat the unborn? They don't say that fetal life has no value. Nobody is saying that. But what is being clearly said is that it hasn't an equal value to the life and the worth of a fully grown woman. And other societies have adopted measures where fetal life gets a certain amount of protection, particularly as the pregnancy develops. That can be reflected in legislation, but it's not the same as a fully grown woman, a woman who may have other children, who have a husband, a partner, or not, as the case may be, and so on. So I think it's important to say that. I think we should say as well that in the past 6 years since we first moved this, there's been consequences of the inaction of this House. 6,500 Irish women ordered abortion pills online without being able to get appropriate assistant treatment from their doctors, even though it's a relatively safe pill anyway. But even still, they shouldn't have had to make that decision because of our inaction. It shouldn't have been the case that almost 20,000 women were forced out of our healthcare system to access safe abortion in the UK in the 6 years since we first discussed that. The barriers to legal and safe abortion have exposed those women to added harm. I'm not going to go over the cases that other deputies have. Savita Halappanavar, Miss Y, who came here to seek asylum and had her rights violated again by effectively a forced pregnancy in circumstances of rape. The case of Amanda Mellett, which has been highlighted already, families with a diagnosis of fatal fetal abnormality who so bravely championed their cases to the Court of Human Rights, and we do owe them a debt of gratitude. So we've had a lot of chances to deal with this before now, and members of this House have said Irish society wasn't ready. But actually, do you know what? It was the politicians who weren't ready, because Irish society has been long ready to deal with this issue. And what we've seen over the past number of years is actually an awakening of the silent majority, the people who didn't go out on the streets and demand, but who said, this is a private, personal thing. I want to respect the views of all people, but I don't want to go out and lobby on that. Those people now are making themselves more known. And, you know, as I say, I think it was the politicians who weren't ready. So I welcome the fact that the Minister has taken the helm on this. I think that's appropriate. I think anybody here who says they're in favour of repeal have a responsibility to go out and campaign for it. Why wouldn't we? To say that you want to protect women's health, lives and choices is something to be very proud of, and I think the Irish people are capable of understanding that message. I think the Citizens' Assembly played a great role. I thought the Joint Committee was a really useful exercise, and if anybody has concerns or doubts on this issue, they should take the time over the sea to read what's online from both the committee and indeed from the Citizens' Assembly, because what was dealt with there was strong, factual, evidence-based information by medical and legal experts, as well as women who've had the direct experience themselves. And that's what should be moulding, if you like, this discussion. It's not a question of whether you agree or disagree with abortion, whether you're pro or anti-abortion. Abortion exists and it happens, and it won't stop happening. It didn't stop happening for the last 6 years when we didn't deal with it before now, and it's not going to stop happening in the future. The idea that we bring this measure in and the floodgates are going to open, it's not scientific, it's not evidence-based, and it's not factually correct. Because the Irish figures that are quoted now, we don't know how reliable they are, because many people don't give Irish addresses when they travel and so on. So to say our rates are lower is not a scientific statement. Having or outlawing abortion does not mean there's no abortion. The choices aren't between abortion or no abortion, they're between safe or unsafe abortion. Myself and Deputy Wallace were in Malawi last week visiting a refugee camp, and we also, because we have an interest in prison issues, we took time out to go and visit some prisons there, and we visited the women's prison in Lilongwe, in the capital. And most of the women who are in prison in Malawi are there for either infanticide or because abortion is outlawed there, that some of them may have miscarried and have been convicted on the basis of induced abortion. And if you look at Ireland's history, and the levels of infanticide in our past and so on exist, because women will always have children, or should have the right to have children when they want, when they feel they're capable of parenthood, and that is something that we should obviously be supporting. I think our shortcomings as a state in allowing backward attitudes to sexuality absolutely have to change. People, I'd imagine most citizens would want to keep abortion numbers down. I certainly do. I don't want anybody having any medical procedure that they don't need to have. But if you really want to reduce the numbers of abortions, all of the evidence shows you that the way to do that is not restrictive legislation. It's comprehensive sex education and widely available contraception and sex education are the ways to reduce, if you like, abortion rates. And I think that's what we need to do. And we need to have safe abortion through our health service, not somebody else's health service. And I think we'd be remiss if we didn't mention here the debt of gratitude that we actually owe to medical practitioners in the UK in particular, who've provided safe abortion for 170,000 Irish women since 1983. And I really hope that the future of this country isn't going to be reliant on other people's health services, so on, that we need to raise the standard of health care for women at home. And if we do that, and some of the measures in the legislation, I agree with Deputy Wallace, some of the measures need to be changed in the proposed legislation, but in generally it's heading in the right direction. But if we bring that in, it will mean earlier and safer abortions without the risks and the costs entailed in travelling, without the stigma of criminality, and the facts indicate that that is going to have a positive impact on women's health. I don't really have time to develop other points, but there was a really excellent speech by the EU Commissioner for Human Rights in the EU Parliament last week, who warned about the danger of backtracking on women's rights and warned about complacency. And he made the point that gender equality has not been achieved in any EU country, and it will take vast cultural and economic changes to actually get anywhere near that. But some of us are further behind than others, and we have to stop paying lip service to women's equality. That means fair play for fair work, it means protecting women's rights in the workplace, affordable childcare, and it does mean absolutely access to full reproductive rights. I think the Commissioner, in his remarks, addressed the issue on a European basis, saying that restrictive laws should be brought into line with international human rights standards and best practice. And best practice is achieved by ensuring that abortion is legal and on a woman's request, and that it takes place in early pregnancy and thereafter is made available throughout pregnancy to protect her life and her health and her freedom from ill treatment. And that's what we should be striving for. Any practical and financial barriers need to be removed, along with criminal penalties. It's a human rights issue, it's a health issue, and it's something that we as a society should really begin to embrace, because it's incredibly positive if women, and if they have a partner, are having children when they want and when they have the means and the wherewithal of supporting those children.